So to those logging in, we're just giving everybody about another minute, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you for your patience. All righty, folks. So hello and welcome to this evening's Zoom webinar that's being produced by the Honors College at West Virginia University. This event is the seventh honoring diversity lecture taking place this spring semester. I am Damian Clement, Associate Dean of WVU's Honors College. Tonight's session is entitled How Diversity is for Everyone, Care Ethics, Critical Pedagogy, and Belonging. This session will be presented by Dr. Joseph Jones, an assistant professor in the Reed College of Media. We will follow our standard Zoom webinar format for this evening. After the presentation, we will host an open question and answer session. Since we're using the Zoom webinar platform for this lecture, before we begin, let me review some of the features that will help you experience this evening's lecture in the best possible way. If you have issues with your audio or video at any point during the webinar, be sure to check your personal Zoom settings and your computer's volume control. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Due to enhanced security protocols, webinar attendees will not be able to see others' questions, only their own. To ask a question, you must click on the Q&A button. A separate screen will appear. Then you may type your questions. The presenter will answer all questions live at the end of the session. If live captioning has been requested, it can be viewed by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. If live captioning was not requested, a captioned version of this recording will be available at honors.wvu.edu. And now it is my distinct pleasure to hand the floor and the screen over to Dr. Joseph Jones. So Joseph, I'm going to stop sharing here. And you should be able to.
Excellent.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Dr. Clement. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Dr. Joseph Jones. I'm an assistant professor in the Reed College of Media, as he mentioned. I teach classes on media ethics and law, media history, media philosophy, media sociology, and a course called Media Identity and Power. And I just really like to thank you. I know it's the Tuesday after spring break, so I'm honored that you would join us tonight. I am an interdisciplinary scholar, and while my degrees are in history and journalism studies, above all else, I consider myself an ethicist. So one reason for this is because I see ethics as a necessary corrective in academia. I think so many of us are concerned with being rational and objective or disinterested pursuers of knowledge that we tend to neglect all of what all of this is for. Why are we here at school? Why are we here in this educational institution? And why do we do what we do? So while I'm all for the rigors of science and the value of empirical knowledge, I also value higher ed as a place to build moral character and to question the causes and consequences of the social worlds we build. So in a nutshell, ethics merely asks, what does it mean to live a good life? What does quality living look like, and how do we get there? And our pursuit of knowledge and our quest to meet metrics or earn our credentials, it seems increasingly rare that we kind of slow down to ask these questions. Just how should we live? So tonight we'll talk about ethics, about living a good life, and specifically we'll talk about a kind of ethics founded in feminist theory that often doesn't get the same recognition as the more established traditions. My goal today is to reframe the conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. A lot of the recent criticisms around DEI stem from an insecurity that it will harm or actively exclude people who aren't considered diverse, that it somehow reverses discrimination, or that it replaces merit with some kind of unfair favoritism. And I'm going to argue this is the exact opposite of the intentions of DEI, and I intend to show how thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging actually strengthens all of us as individuals and as a group. So in other words, the actively cultivating DEI benefits everyone, and that the attempts around the country and even in our home state to dismantle DEI are misguided and ultimately detrimental to living a good life. So first off, traditional programs and strategies have been created around diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, as a way to address historic inequities and the active exclusion or marginalization of groups that were not allowed an equal status in society. So this includes women, Black and Brown folks, sexual orientations outside of the heteronormative, people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, perhaps people who practice non-Judeo-Christian religions, and that's all well and good. But recognizing diversity and simply including more kinds of people is not the end goal itself. I would argue that the whole point of DEI is not just to categorize and count people, it's to really foster a sense of belonging. So we can include people, but what's the value in that unless these people are actually going to feel seen, unless they're actually going to be recognized and valued as part of a community? So DEI has been described as giving people who have been historically marginalized a seat at the table, but more than a seat, people need to be heard and listened to. So I had a friend, for example, when I was in second grade, anytime he would hang out and go somewhere, his mom would tell him, oh, take your little brother. The little brother didn't want to just be begrudgingly included, right? He wanted to be accepted by us, to feel like he belonged as part of a group and not just someone we were kind of forced to include. So the actual end goal of DEI isn't mere inclusion, it's acceptance and a deeper sense of inclusion that involves being genuinely welcoming to participants. So genuine DEI should foster actual belonging. Another way we can think of this is DEI is the efforts we make as an organization or community to create an environment or space where people can be their true selves. And belonging is the actual success of those efforts. So the thing we can look at to see if our attempts are achieving what they're intended to achieve, right? Not just kind of metrics and numbers. But belonging is not something that can be easily measured, and that's why it's often left out of DEI initiatives. So we can measure demographics or how much funding something gets or how many programs are started. But for belonging, we're talking about quality, about a feeling or a state of being. And like ethics, we're stepping back from mere descriptions or metrics and slowing down to ask, is this leading to a better relationship, to a better quality life, to what would be considered good living? And just a reminder that this concept of belonging is built into our unofficial school song, that it's not country roads, take me home to the place where I'm included, it's to take me where I belong. So at its simplest, we could say that DEI or DEIB means the fair treatment, full participation, and adequate care of all people. This is the intention of DEI, the end goal of what it's trying to achieve. So when DEI is attacked or dismissed as creating social divisions or making people feel guilty or unfavorably favoring some group, or the latest accusation I've seen is it somehow encourages anti-Semitism, I would say what you're talking about is not genuine attempts at inclusion and belonging. And I mean this in the nicest possible way, that your own insecurities about your place in the world are causing you to misunderstand DEI as the exact opposite of what it's actually meant to do. So before we get to my main arguments tonight, I do want to engage some of the talking points politicians have been using to criticize and dismantle DEI funding and initiatives. Again, I think this misunderstanding stems from kind of an egocentric insecurity that somehow I will personally be losing out if other people are granted recognition and respect. But recognition and respect are not a zero-sum game where we must compete over scarce resources. Recognition and respect are a moral minimum to coexist and flourish as self-governing citizens in a strong society where we can all meet our potential and lead good lives. So let's be clear about what DEI is not and see how it's actually about quite the opposite of its recent criticisms. So first, it is not about favoritism towards any particular group or discriminating against those who have historically held power. It is about equal recognition and validating the experiences of everyone and everyone being worthy of equal respect. If someone perceives DEI as favoritism or discrimination, then this says more about their own kind of position in traditional social hierarchies and how they imagine power should be exercised. Second, DEI is not about generating guilt. If someone feels guilty, then this again speaks to their own individual experiences with unexamined privilege. Third, DEI is not about indoctrination. Quite the contrary, there really is nothing simple or straightforward about DEI, and it cannot be easily broken down into these digestible ideas that can be used to brainwash people. Interpreting DEI as propaganda or mere ideology kind of misses the point and reveals more that someone does not believe in true equality or has some essentialized view that some groups of people are inherently superior than others. And finally, DEI is not primarily about social activism. Again, unless someone sees that only recognizing people like themselves is the natural state of things, and any attempt to change that would be considered activism. Okay, so what is it actually about then? So what we're actually talking about is quite the opposite of these kind of criticisms. So DEI doesn't call for discrimination or favoritism. It asks for self-reflection about how we might otherwise discriminate and favor those that are more like ourselves. So just really thinking about who we are and kind of our approach to the world, not to favor other people, but to kind of think about our own preferences. Even when other people and their experiences are completely valid and worthy of recognition, we should still kind of question why we think the way we do. DEI is not about guilt. It is about empathy. So having empathy does not mean you have to agree with someone or endorse their worldviews. It simply means you try to genuinely understand another person about where somebody is coming from, what they may have gone through, what their experiences might be. It is really this good faith attempt to actually listen and know somebody before immediately passing judgment or dismissing somebody. The opposite of indoctrination, DEI is about critical thinking. You will never hear someone just say, here's a formula for DEI, just kind of accept it without thinking, right? The whole point is to think. The whole point is that self-reflection, to question, to see how your experiences and ideas might differ from someone else and why it is the case, and then again, what those consequences might be. And finally, perhaps we could call DEI social activism if we truly believed in a world where we encourage hierarchy or the concentration of power or the inability to improve one's lot in life. But a more accurate characteristic of what DEI is and is trying to accomplish, especially in a democracy where we believe in self-improvement, we believe in making the world a better place, is DEI is trying to ensure that we have widespread and comprehensive notions of care, that everyone has what they need to meet their potential, contribute what they can, and help us all as an interdependent social assemblage to flourish. So one of the main criticisms, especially as DEI has been politicized, our increasingly polarized two-party system, is that DEI is some kind of push of left-wing ideology. But when we're talking about recognition, respect, and providing people what they need, we're not bound by these abstract divisions of left versus right. In fact, the criticisms and bills that I've seen challenging and limiting DEI are all based on theoretical premises of, well, this is what DEI could be. But what DEI actually is, these programs and initiatives, the good ones anyway, are about addressing the realities of having a diverse population and how we might ensure fairness in the diverse range of needs that exist. So quite the opposite of ideology. I think the criticisms appear more kind of about theory, whereas actually addressing these issues is more about thinking about the diversity of reality. So here are my three main arguments tonight. I hope you will kind of basically, here are the takeaways I have that I hope you'll leave with. So DEI is about rigorous self-reflection and the appropriate material response to promote widespread social belonging and care so that we can all become the best versions of our individual and collective selves. Diversity is an ontological reality, an epistemological necessity, and an axiological imperative to ensure good life, and we'll go over what those terms mean. And with genuine DEI, nobody loses, we all gain. So I will make these arguments by addressing care ethics, the nature and point of education via an approach called critical pedagogy, and providing an empirical example from my own research on the Black press or Black-owned and operated media. So with all of this, it brings me back to the title of this presentation, that diversity is for everyone. It's not just some idea that benefits people categorized as diverse, it benefits everybody. It makes us all more intelligent, more productive, more understanding, more resilient, and perhaps most importantly, it recognizes the world as it actually exists and works with and through our differences, not ignoring them or glossing over them, so that we can all be transformed through collaboration and engagement. So the first step on this journey is just a question of ethics, a branch of knowledge that is sometimes undervalued or perhaps dismissed as subjective in a space like academia, where so many of us adhere to the dictates of science and pursue things like disinterested knowledge, universal truths, external validity, those kinds of things. And while my own approach to ethics is definitely grounded in the empirical, I will be the first to admit that ethical thinking cannot aspire to being disinterested, though many smarter people than myself had tried to establish it as kind of a universal truth. While attempts have been made to make it universal and scientific, the reason ethics can't be disinterested is because it's the very epitome of knowledge that is interested, and that's because it deals with the meaning of life. So overall, ethics is really just about asking, what does it mean to live a good quality life? What does a good life look like, and how do we behave and approach the world in order to achieve this quality life? So to answer such questions, we can't just retreat to complete abstractions because it concerns our very beings, our very orientation to the world, what we value and prioritize and pursue with the limited time we have here on Earth. So immediately we can see that ethics has us ask critical questions. And critical here just meaning philosophical, in the philosophical sense, just meaning that we're asking about the causes and consequences of our social world and how or if things should be different. So basically, ethics asks us recognize the contingent nature of our social world, that things are so, but not necessarily so, that there is no just the way things are, So looking at human history, at global cultures, at our own changing lifestyles, we can see there is a diverse number of ways to live. And instead of just one being natural or simply the way it is, all social life has been designed and developed along a certain path. So ethics, along with history, enables us to question that path and ask if it's the kind of life we want to live, if it's the way, we really want to do things and not just what we've been told or how to live. So basically, it can be a very radical notion to ask about the quality of life. Like, is this actually a good life? Because it does have us question how we've been socialized, how we've been raised, the social expectations we've been given. And we can question these social expectations and ask, is this what we really want? So in other words, ethics isn't a discipline that offers final answers and tells you what to think. It is meant to help you establish what's called moral autonomy, providing you values and principles to approach the world, but ultimately enabling you to make your own choices about how best to flourish. So moral autonomy is not the same as simple freedom. Freedom, especially in the United States, is often understood as negative freedom, that I am simply free from outside control or authority. Moral autonomy, on the other hand, is an informed freedom understood in a positive sense. So instead of merely being free from outside control, I am free to behave some specific way because I understand the world and it is morally preferable. So by the end of the session, I hope to help make you all more morally autonomous. Ultimately, I want you to convince you of my arguments that diversity is for everyone and DEI efforts benefit all of society. But the purpose is also to have you walk away, to talk you through my logic, my ethical thinking, and for you to decide if it is morally preferable to live with these kind of diversity efforts. My own field of study where I primarily apply ethics is journalism and media. And since I'm going to provide you an example from my field, I do just want to point out here, when we talk about media ethics specifically, we're basically just asking, how is media functioning? Is it helping us to live a good life? Is the news we watch, read, or listen to informing us as citizens and helping us understand the world? Or is it merely confirming our biases and entertaining us so that a handful of people can make money? Is media serving a public interest, or does it make us feel bored, distracted, anxious, and angry all the time? Is, for example, social media helping you live your best possible life and genuinely connecting you with other people and points of view, or does it drain you and play on your insecurities and anxieties and jealousies and fears? Do you experience joy when you use media, or does it numb you out so you just don't have to really confront about your other problems? So there's no easy answer to those questions, but those are the kinds of questions we ask when investigating media ethics. So if ethics asked what it means to live a good quality life and how do we get there, Western ethics has answered with what I'll call the big three, that these are the three kind of most common ethical approaches that come up. You'll see that they essentially deal with the same overall question, but they value and prioritize different things. So they thus have different ways of approaching life and considering what's important, so they arrive at ethical choices by different routes. So even if they arrive at the same conclusions, the reasoning is different, and that is truly the heart of ethics. It is about reason, logic, and showing your work, not simply moralizing and inserting something as right or wrong. So the first approach I've listed is deontology, most often associated with Immanuel Kant in the 18th century. And deon is the Greek word for duty. So it basically sees ethics as figuring out what one's duty and obligations are and then meeting them. On a related note, it asks about rights. What rights do we all have and how can we go about respecting each other's rights so the world is fair, and how can we achieve justice? So Kant famously comes up with his categorical imperative, which is an attempt to make morality dependent on universal reason and science. And he basically boiled ethics down to know your duties and obligations, understand what we all owe each other, and then just do it. Consequentialism, on the other hand, and a form of it known as utilitarianism, most often associated with Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill of the 18th and 19th century, doesn't concern itself with duties and the moralities of the act themselves. Rather, it asks after the consequences of our actions and whether they cause harm or good. So Bentham's famous axiom is whether some act caused more happiness to exist than harm, or whether what we was doing was causing the most good for the most people. And finally, virtue ethics, most often linked to Aristotle, operating in the 4th century BCE, approaches ethics as a matter of moral character, that ethical decision-making is a permanent part of our personality, and that we should identify good people, see what dispositions or virtues they have, and then model our behaviors on that. So although all three have different approaches, you can see that the three share some similar traits in that, to varying degrees, they are all concerned with the individual. They all address abstract notions of justice, the good, and virtue, and they are thus all attempts to establish some universal norms and standards when it comes to ethics and how we can live quality lives. So I'm not dismissing these big three, but to this list, I would add a fourth pivotal approach that brings the other Western three kind of approaches together. in what's called care ethics. And this was an approach first devised by women philosophers like Carol Gilligan and Rita Manning in the 1980s. So I don't want to get into the initially gendered nature of this approach compared to the others, but it is good to recognize that it took women scholars, it took a diversity in experience and thus viewpoint to devise a particular way of doing ethics that can inform and ultimately strengthen these other schools of thought. So the primary concerns of care ethics is that before we are even considered individuals, we all exist due to and by a series of connections and relationships. So care ethics thus prioritizes our needs and whether particular choices or ways of living cultivate and maintain the healthy relationships that meet our needs. So one way to think of the difference between care ethics and the other approaches is you're not just stepping back and debating these abstract principles of what is just, what is right, what is good, what is virtuous. You are situated in a specific situation, you are embedded in the world, embodied and part of it, and you face your own unique context and in confluence of events. So we're not removed individuals asking about the world from nowhere or outside of it. We live in the world. So a better question to kind of ask is how can I be attentive to that world and the relationships around me, and how can I best respond to what's in front of me? How can I best respond kind of to these relationships that make me who I am? And we can respond instead of just a singular notion of abstract justice or virtue through our actual experiences. So if we had to kind of have some general definition of care that we could all kind of be on the same page, this is a really good place to start. That care as an activity includes everything we do to maintain, contain, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. And that world includes our bodies, ourselves, and our environment, all of which we seek to interweave in a complex life-sustaining web. So we can see this definition is very broad, and nearly anything that keeps us alive could be considered a part of care. But I want you to notice that care is an activity. It's a process. It's a give and take. It's something that we don't just have, but we have to do. And it's not just something that you can buy. I'd also like to see that this is a universal definition, but what this care actually looks like could be different in different cultures or for different people in their own kind of unique situations or in the unique set of relationships. Because unlike the other three ethical approaches, or even science or professionalism or objectivity or whatever else we prioritize, care ethics asks about needs. Not just what is right, good, just, or scientifically valid, but what do we actually need? So care includes all of the material, emotional, psychological, physical, social needs that humans require to live well, to be healthy, to repair our bodies, to maintain and protect our welfare, and to pursue happiness. So before you think anything kind of counts as care, though, I just want to identify a few characteristics of genuine care and when we are obligated to provide care, even though we all kind of need it. So caring is a process and a relationship, and a defining trait of true care and what we call motivational displacement. This is when you try to understand the cared for on their own terms. You don't simply project kind of your own understanding of the world onto other people or tell people how they should behave. You are attentive and engage people where they are, not necessarily agreeing with them, but understanding their needs as they understand them. Then in your actions, you have their best interest at heart. Again, you are not projecting your own desires of what you can gain. You are providing care so that the cared for can reach their potential and flourish. So just for my own field, for example, a caring journalist wouldn't lie to or manipulate their audiences so they could keep them afraid and coming back for more. Instead, a caring journalist would inform citizens so those citizens could make quality decisions that were in their own best interest. So genuine care is meeting someone's needs in good faith. Not all needs can be met, and meeting a need does not necessarily constitute care. So if a child says they need an energy drink right before bedtime, it might not be a caring move to provide them one. So we can think about our obligations to care when we think about the seriousness of someone's need, whether meeting that need is appropriate, and if we have the ability to meet that need. So the main point I want to make about care ethics and how it relates to DEI starts with some basic facts that are often obscured in other ethical approaches and is outright ignored in some of the claims of absolute freedom or the entitlement to rights. So what we call individuals, when we talk about individual rights or individual freedom, we're not actually talking about a single person. And this is because of the simple fact that individuals do not pre-exist their relationships. Being formed in a uterus inside your mother, or if you were formed in vitro fertilization, you were never able to survive on your own. None of us was born free. We were born completely dependent on others for care. As a baby, you could not raise yourself. You did not invent your own language, your own diet, your own customs. You have never existed as an isolated individual, and there's no reason to treat you that way once we start considering what's right, what's good, or how we might all flourish and lead a good life. So everyone needs care right from the start, and all of us receive care through our relationships with others. No one is a mere individual that pre-exists their relationships that make them who they are. So we humans are embodied and embedded biological beings. We also live in a material environment where we need water, oxygen, nitrogen, all sorts of requirements from the ecological systems that enable us to live. And to talk about individuals not pre-existing their relationships, we are not alone in our own bodies. Living inside every person are trillions of microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other life forms that are collectively known as the microbiome. So various organs have distinct microbial inhabitants, microbial inhabitants. There are millions of bacteria, for example, in your stomach, without which you would not be able to digest the food you do. Outside of our bodies, trees and plankton make 98% of the world's oxygen, which is necessary for us to breathe. So I couldn't exist as a me, as an I with an identity and with rights, without the we that are the other organisms in my body, the organisms in the environment, and the people that nurtured and raised me. So what we normally see as individuals are actually co-constituted. They are quite literally made by their relationships. So you can think about your own life, even from what you did today. You probably got dressed, you ate, maybe you drove or took a bus, maybe you had a cup of coffee, you checked your phone. Think about all the agricultural workers, food processors, truck drivers, dairy farmers, meat packing specialists, sanitation workers, coffee growers, car mechanics, construction workers, factory workers, all of the people that enabled that stuff to happen. As a society, we can see how we live in mutual beneficial relationships with other people that enable us to live the kind of lives we lead. So once we are aware of this basic fact that none of us has pre-existed our relationships or can be who we are without these connections, the question then becomes, how do we respond to these relationships? How do we respond to the farmers and truck drivers that enabled us to eat, or the sanitation workers that make our environment suitable for productive dwelling? Historically, how to respond to enslaved labor that built the wealth of the US, while the benefits of this wealth were denied to them and their descendants? How to respond to the fact that women's unpaid labor enabled something called the economy to grow? Adam Smith famously argued that the pursuit of self-interest in the marketplace caused the wealth of nations to grow. But I would ask, who cooked Adam Smith's dinner? Who managed his emotional needs when the other political economists criticized his work? It was not someone who was merely self-interested as an individual. It was somebody existing with him in a relationship. All of us have required care and had our needs met outside of a marketplace. So how do we now identify who is most in need and how do we appropriately respond? So this is the heart of the DEI initiatives, and this is their point, that all of us need care. So how can we identify the most pressing needs and address them? Again, the point is not to favor some group merely because they've been historically excluded, though that would be a form of justice. The reason the reason that this is so is because we are all self-interested to achieve this fact. Even if we belong to groups that aren't traditionally considered diverse, it is a simple fact that care ethics makes obvious, and that is that we are all who we are because of each other. We do not become who we are in isolation. And while I wouldn't take it away from many of you all of you that you've worked hard, you've put in effort to earn your credentials to get where you are, it is all of us. If all of us were to actually stop and think about it, all of the people that grow our food, make our clothes, teach us how to read or write or understand the world, they've toiled in factories, they've constructed our buildings, they've laid asphalt for roads. There are countless numbers of people that have enabled our lives and helped make us who we are. And these people were not all the same. They had diverse range of interests, of views, of practices, of personalities, of priorities, of values. They had different loved ones and beliefs. And recognizing that diversity, valuing what it's given us, and making sure that people who have made us who we are feel welcomed, included, and seen, that is the essence of DEI and why it is something we should all value and cherish. I'd also point out that it is not just meant for our contemporary selves. This extends to how we became who we all are today. So even if someone's gonna, say, "Oh, I grow my own food, I live off the grid, I'm an individual," there is no us of today without the them of the past. I won't dwell on this, but someone else figured out what food was edible. Someone else created our language. Somebody else made everything we do possible. We only have the cultures that we have, the ideas that we do, the lifestyles we can live, because other people in the past made decisions, worked hard, cultivated particular points of view, and cared for each other. Care ethics and its sister philosophy of Ubuntu has also established that there are no simple human beings, as if all of us are just who we are, right? That we're just beings. We actually continually become who we are. Each moment requires effort. Our identities and our relationships require maintenance and work, and we must perpetually enact who we are, or we cease to be those very things. Not only that, we can only become who we are in relationships with other people. So, for example, all of us as professors or grad students or undergraduate students or staff members, None of us is those things in isolation. I am only a professor because I have students. We both learn from each other and grow based on our relationship, not because I have some deep essence that is professor and they have an essence that is student. If I stopped caring and didn't actively edify or mentor them, or they stopped caring and didn't show up to class, we both stop being professors and students. It is that active relationship that makes us who we are, and we must constantly become who we are, or it stops being the case. So this is just another insight of care ethics and another argument for the necessity and benefits of DEI, that we must continually perform into existence the best versions of ourselves. And this happens when we recognize others, when we value them, and make them belong, even if we don't agree with them or even if we're all different. So since none of us exists as purely detached individuals, and we all become who we are together, then we should cultivate diversity and belonging, because such a range of experiences and viewpoints and community bonds can make us more perceptive, more resilient, more competent in the face of a complex and rapidly changing world. And we're not saying that all viewpoints need to be equally considered, as if people, who believe that the earth is flat have an equal standing with those who can prove the earth is round, or that diverse viewpoints can coexist about who won an empirically verifiable election. Diversity and inclusion do not mean abandoning standards or criteria that we have for evaluating logic, but it does mean attempting to have a good faith understanding of why people believe what they do, meeting people where they are and recognizing their experiences to respond with the proper care that they need. And when we think about DEI in its institutional setting in higher education, we can also ask ourselves, what is education for? I hope those of you who have spent lots of money on tuition ask yourself this question a lot. And the basic answer from sociologists is that it is intended for the transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next, or for cultivating knowledge and skills of an individual for future living. So that is certainly important, and that is one way to look at it. But we've also talked about developing a person's moral character and autonomy. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with this quote from Einstein, but education is not simply the learning of facts or the transmission of knowledge. It's the training the mind to think. It's actually encouraging independent thought and the potential for wisdom and not just knowledge. And developing this critical thinking is the heart of a particular approach to education known as critical pedagogy. So this approach is multidisciplinary and many different schools of thought exist here, but I'm really going to simplify this in one slide, which was probably doing it a disservice. But here are some of the reasons it gives us for the importance of education. We can see how education is not just about transmitting knowledge, it's about developing an understanding and awareness of how the world works so that people can properly respond. So we can think of education as a guard against being taken advantage of or exploited. When you know how things operate, then you're less susceptible to someone using your ignorance against you. If you have high media literacy, for example, you're less likely to be taken in by misinformation or emotional manipulation. If I was more knowledgeable about cars, I would be less at the whims of mechanics who could pretty much say anything to me and I would believe them. When we're educated about a fair wage or our rights or the history of our social institutions, we can properly respond to systems in power and be less subject to their potential abuses. If we also think about democracy as self-government, where our communities are built on the consent of the governed and the choices and actions of citizens, then education is also key for a well-informed and wise populace to practice democracy and flourish. So the whole point of education is not just learning, it's also emancipation, where we break free of ignorance and the workings of power and oppression, and we transcend the things that limit us so we can reach our potential and become our best possible selves. Critical pedagogy thus aims to help students recognize the connections between their individual problems and experiences and the social contexts in which they are embedded. It helps students develop a consciousness of moral autonomy, recognize authoritarian tendencies, and connect knowledge to power and the ability to take constructive actions. So students in this view are not merely empty vessels that receive knowledge. They are active agents that take responsibility for their learning, connecting their lived experience with the classroom, and always thinking about how they might use their education for democratic world making. Students thus work together with teachers as teachers meet students where they are, respond accordingly, and both student and teacher develop their intellectual and moral character in a dialogic manner in conversation, and not just through mimicry or rote memorization or going through the motions. So both students and teachers need an openness. They need to be aware of the diversity of experiences and viewpoints that each other have, while also holding fast to their own specific positionality that inform their own views that they can then self-reflect on. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are thus a main key to education. They are an epistemological necessity. That means they help create knowledge so that we can all fully learn and meet our potential, making the most of our talents, contributing to a higher quality of life, and a caring community with this widespread and comprehensive notion of flourishing and success. Okay, so now that we've seen how care speaks the language of need and noticed the relationships that make us who we are and how critical pedagogy approaches education as a means of emancipation from our limitations and can empower us to participate in democratic world making, I do want to give you a quick example of how this is illustrated, how this illustrates the need for diversity, not just as an extra box to check or some additional requirement, but as a necessity for understanding the world and for creating knowledge, arriving something at closer to truth. So in the 1890s, the lynching of African Americans is prevalent. Basically, a Black person would be accused of a crime, and without a trial, a mob of civilians would hang and kill that person. It was seen as a big social event where large crowds would gather. They would take pictures. Many of these photos were turned into postcards that people would then send to each other. So even supposedly objective and fact-based newspapers of the era, like the New York Times, would essentially report these events without context. Like this lynching happened here, this lynching happened there. And this just the facts reporting kind of assumed the guilt of a Black person lynched, as did the framing of African Americans as, brutes who are naturally committed crimes, so the newspaper said. So basically, there's reporting of an event where a Black person got what they supposedly deserved. We'll enter journalist Ida B. Wells, who does some investigative reporting. She interviews accusers, she questions police, she seeks out witnesses, she gathers statistics on lynching throughout different regions. She found that many African Americans were lynched not for crimes as reported in the newspapers, but sometimes for merely having a consensual relationship with the white person, or that a witness had lied, or that the person lynched was only accused of a crime after the lynching became public knowledge. So Wells did some original porting. She didn't just rely on official sources, she diversified her sources, and she found that many of these lynchings weren't for any real crimes, but occurred when some Black people showed signs of success in social competition. By contextualizing facts and situating objectivity among the humans that generated and were affected by such facts, Wells uncovered something closer to truth. The traditional press was limited by their cultural biases, and even their so-called fact-based reporting had failed to uncover the truth about violence against Black people. So in other words, seemingly objective journalism reinforced the status quo, and more subjective but no less true views were thus epistemologically necessary to counter hegemonic thinking and create more meaningful and true forms of communication. So in other words, it took diversity, it took thinking outside of traditional viewpoints, and care for a marginalized group to arrive at truth. So that's kind of where I'm going to end up here today. I will basically define these kinds of terms. I think so much in this conversation, we don't define DEI enough. And diversity is merely about having and encouraging differences in backgrounds, beliefs, and behavior. Equity is giving each person the resources and opportunities they need based on their circumstances to meet their potential. And inclusion and belonging is the state of being valued, respected, and supported with the right conditions in place to achieve your full potential. This isn't just abstract or something for people empowered to decide. It is also a person's perception of acceptance and feeling heard and seen within a group. So I'm going to end with a quote here from the president of the American Council on Education. He basically said, "In American higher education, we have been working to make campuses diverse and inclusive for well over 100 years. This is not about teaching white students to be ashamed or teaching Black students to hate white students. This is about making campuses inclusive communities where everybody can prosper." So this really aligns with what I've been trying to say, that we all become the best version of our individual and collective selves, the more diverse people and ideas we are exposed to. And it is everyone's best interest to live in a society where care is widespread, free-flowing, and diversely considered. So diversity is part of reality. We all come from diverse backgrounds. We all have an array of experiences, but it's also a part of building knowledge. We can thus use diversity to learn from each other and broaden our views. And embracing this reality can be a foundation for leading a good life, quality life, and with genuine DEI efforts, nobody loses. We all become the best possible versions of ourselves. So I think I will share one more slide. So basically, there's a new college being formed. My college, the Reed College of Media, is being merged with the College of Creative Arts. And I'm made a co-chair of kind of our new DEI committee here. And I want to just read a little bit from a statement, part of our statement that we've come out with. So you'll notice some of the words I bold here too very much relate to everything we've just talked about. So by recognizing that the arts and media shape and are shaped by culture, we take it as our responsibility to use our artistic, journalistic, and scholarly platforms to work toward an equitable environment for our students, staff, and the larger communities that we serve. We embrace the idea of academic freedom and the varied experiences that students bring to our classrooms and view them as a resource in the creation of care-based and empathetic discussions with the campus community. So really, again, the whole point of education is diversity. It is to be exposed to different ideas, to broaden your worldviews, and for you to kind of internalize what you will and at least recognize and respect others so you can become the best possible version of yourself. So that's where I'll end today. Thank you for your time and consideration. Diversity is for everyone, so I hope we have some questions for us all to consider.
All right. All right, Joe. Thank you very much. Very informative. Very, very informative. So now the floor is open. Attendees, what questions? I see one here in the Q&A. Okay. Great talk. This is kind of off topic, but can you repeat your two-liner about Adam Smith? It went like Adam Smith said something, 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 but who cared for Adam Smith's emotional needs when the other economists criticized his work? Very funny, and we love dragging Adam Smith, so I have to write it down carefully. Thanks again. You're muted, Joe. Okay.
Yeah, let me see if I can find. I mean, I basically was just saying, right. Adam Smith basically makes this argument that it was the invisible hand of the market that helped the wealth of nations grow. But I would ask, and this is actually a book title: Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner? So you can look up the book "Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner," and it's basically just the argument that somebody actually cared for Adam Smith, that there wasn't invisible hands that took care of Adam Smith. It was most likely his wife who was taking care of Adam Smith and managing his emotional needs when people were mean to him. So I don't have the exact quote. I kind of was just going off the cuff there a little bit, but yes, it was basically just questioning, well, who cooked Adam Smith's dinner? You're going to tell me about your visible hands. What about the visible hands that actually took care of you, Mr. Smith? That's what I would ask.
Okay.
Great question, though.
Yeah, it's good. Okay. What other questions would we have for Dr. Jones? And in the interim, can you, Joseph, while we're waiting for questions, can you tell us, what kind of steered you in this direction in terms of pursuing this area as a academic research interest for you? What was your defining moment that steered you in this direction?
Yeah, wow. Probably studying history. So I started out my young life from a very particular point of view. I kind of studied history and saw everything that the world had gone through, including how women have been treated, how gay people have been treated, the colonization of Africa. I witnessed a lot of things in history. And then I started studying German philosophy, and that got me very kind of cerebral, thinking about different philosophical concepts, and it was all very convincing. And then I started reading like women authors as well, and that really blew my mind and kind of changed some of my perspectives on things. It informed the rest of this. Like that's kind of the point of what I'm making here too, that the more diversely you expose yourself to ideas, it can make your previous ideas even stronger. So I'm going to give credit to reading women, and particularly Black women intellectuals. That's the reason I went down this path. They are very convincing, and I highly recommend that people read very broadly.
Well, keep it on that term. You say reading woman, Black woman. Do you have any specific, who are some of these authors?
I mean, Bell Hooks is probably the best place I think anybody can start as far as that all goes, as far as being very accessible. Angela Davis, Ida B. Wells, I would read her biography. That's a really good biography. Joan Tronto. I mean, just Google Black women intellectuals, and they don't have to all be Black, like women in general. To me, women authors, I think, have been left out of a lot of the canons of our disciplines. And the ones that really opened my mind, Donna Haraway, Stacey Alamo, lots of different names pop into my head when it kind of comes to all of that. So read broadly would be my recommendation. There's also a great newspaper here in town, Black by God, the West Virginian. So if that's by Crystal Good. So if you want to diversify your news sources, look for Black by God. bbg.org, I think, is the website address. And that can, again, just give you a different kind of viewpoint to community events that are happening. And you might think you know what's going on, but taking it from that slightly different perspective will just kind of inform your ideas even more.
Nice. Oh, wow. I'm learning a lot. What questions do we have? Any participants? Do you all have any questions for Dr. Joseph? We have a pretty silent group tonight.
It's a lot to take in.
Yep. Well, I'll ask a few more questions. So what are some of the current projects you're working on?
So I've actually been getting a lot recently into artificial intelligence, into
Oh.
AI. So I
Mm-hmm.
study something called surveillance capitalism, essentially about how all of our online activities are tracked, and then our kind of interests are used against us to kind of manipulate us for other people's benefit. I've been particularly looking at how this does affect kind of us as citizens living in a democracy, a diverse democracy. So how not only does it disproportionately kind of harm racial minorities and women and people lower socioeconomic statuses. It also kind of interferes with our abilities to talk to one another, to understand each other, because all of our media is kind of manipulated into these echo chambers where we just confirm our own biases and we have less kind of diverse viewpoints. The internet seems like this open place where we can kind of find anything else we want. But the way algorithms and the way the business model of the internet works is to actually kind of feed us everything that they think we'll like based on previous
Mm-hmm.
behaviors. So
Mm-hmm.
I've really been questioning kind of the use of AI, who owns it and who's benefiting from it, and how they're kind of using it to make us less empathetic, less understanding, to make our world smaller instead of more broad and diverse. So that is the thing I've looked at most recently. I'm also working on the history of the Black press. I've been working on that a lot. I'm incorporating care ethics. I think the Black press, so that's Black owned and operated media here in the United States. For those people who don't know, the first Black newspaper started in 1827 when essentially Black men were denied a space in white newspapers to talk about, their freedom and if they should get the vote and all these things. So Black folks have had to start their own newspapers, and there's a long history there of what I would say kind of an alternative form of journalism, more informed by care ethics, that I think today's journalists could actually learn from. I think today's journalists, it feels so removed sometimes. People don't want to watch the news. I don't have control over it. I can't make a difference or anything like that. And the Black press is really a good example historically about how to care for specific communities and how journalism can be practiced in a way that is more relevant to us as actual people. So I've been looking at that as well. And then I was in the recent the research edition of the WVU magazine for my work on food journalism. So I'm also very interested in food journalism and how journalists talk about food and how that invites us to think about our relationships with what we eat. So a wide range of things that I've been into.
I like the you're talking about Black newspapers. Can you help us understand what that was like? What that industry, I don't know if it's an industry, it's like in West Virginia. Do you know
Yeah,
anything about?
yeah, so there's one. That's the
Okay,
one I mentioned. Yeah,
okay.
but so like I'll just give a quick example of like the Black press was talking about police brutality against African Americans 100 years before George
Mm,
Floyd, right? It came into the national consciousness with kind of George Floyd in 2020. But Black newspapers have been talking about these issues for so long. So to me, like the Black press is a way again to point out issues that maybe people didn't think about that still existed, and they've done it in a way that I think everybody can kind of learn from. That the Black press is not just for African Americans, it is for everybody. It can make you smarter, it can make you more aware, it can just make you more thoughtful about how the world works. So to me, it is a very important social institution that I don't think enough people know about. And I'm trying to kind of help get it out there some more too. Yeah.
wow, that's awesome. I
Yeah.
didn't know anything about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Black by
Okay,
God, the West Virginia. Take a read. Yeah.
I will go
Donate
and
some
take a
money too
look.
if you want. Yeah.
Well, I'm okay. I see your questions. Have you found that your care ethics framing of DEIB is effective for convincing white people to not be scared of DEIB initiatives? That's a
Yeah,
good
I mean,
question.
I hope so. Like, there is nothing to be scared of, right? Like, yeah, like I don't know just yet. I'm gonna be honest with you, I was very afraid of what was gonna happen this legislative session in West Virginia. There was gonna be an anti-DEI bill that came out. Luckily, it did not pass. Well, it didn't really come to the floor. It probably would have passed, but it didn't get voted on. Um, so I don't know. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of what DEI is, and I think if we kind of just reframe it and think about it differently, about it is like, and I hate even just take it away from people who have been historically treated as DI. We are all diverse. Like we all have different views. Students all have different kind of needs that they need to be met in certain ways. So to me, I want to take diversity and not make it this dirty word that's been like politicized, but how do we actually consider people as individuals, even as we exist in these large social institutions? How do we consider as people individuals and think about what they actually need? So to me, I will use care, I think, over DEI. I just think DEI is kind of historically the most important form that takes. But to me, I question all of society and how can we make society more caring, not just more profitable or knowledgeable or scientific or these other words that we're actually looking for. So great question again.
Nice question. Okay, we have another one here. People sometimes think of ethics as being so high above them. Can you talk about how you have built your own personal ethics and some of the ways you have learned from mistakes you may have made to strengthen your resolve?
Yes, great question. Hey, Marla, good to see you.
Yeah, Paula.
Yeah, my own personal ethics. I mean, really, a lot of that does come from just kind of experience, because ethics is very personal. So I read a lot of philosophers, I read about principles and all these things, but nobody can just kind of tell you what also exists in your gut, like what you kind of feel, those kind of ethical instincts that you have. So I guess the best way to kind of cultivate that is to think about it, but at the same time, it really is about how you're tested, the experiences you come through. I'm going to be honest, Marla. I think teaching ethics has helped make me more ethical. I think teaching a diverse range of students. I've taught in Missouri, I've taught in Kansas. Now I'm here at West Virginia. Teaching just different kinds of students really makes me kind of adjust who I am, to kind of humble myself too, right? I don't have all the answers and I don't know everybody's experiences. So I really just try to listen to people, be attentive to other people. And that can actually help me be more ethical, is to kind of consider those diverse ways of thinking about things. So I'll give credit, I guess, to students for making me more ethical and just being attentive to other people.
Nice. What other questions do we have for Dr. Joe? Really informative. I mean, this was a good presentation, Dr. Joe.
Well, thank you.
What? Yep. Well, not seeing any. We appreciate the opportunity to visit with you this evening. If anyone has any additional questions about Dr. Joseph and his area of expertise there, you can reach out to Dr. Joseph. His email is joseph.jones@mail.wvu.edu. An archived version of this webinar will be available later on the Honors College website. Thank you for spending time with us. And everyone have a good evening. Joe, thank you so very much
Great.
again for your
Thank you very much,
time.
Dave.
Everyone have a good evening. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. It's